Hello guys and gals and welcome! So today I'm going to be starting a new series. This is a series that probably won't last too ridiculously long, but I thought it could be fun. What is my new series? Well, my new series is basically what are my favorite builds. I have a lot of builds and a lot of characters, and not all of them are going to get a video, unfortunately. Some of the characters, like I think GGM Highlander, he's probably not getting a video, for instance. And there's a couple other ones like Ardor, she's probably not getting a video. There's a couple characters that probably will be getting a video, like North Star and Taco Hell and things like that. That I want to talk about the builds that I created, how they turned out, what they were good at, what they weren't good at, etc. Today's video is going to be about Taco Hill. This was my latest season character in Season 4, by the way. It was my first time playing a Fire Druid all the way through from the beginning to the end, and I'd like to talk about him real quick. First off, let's go into the character, and let's just pull him up. Why not? Let's just go ahead and pull him up. I'm going to show you how I have him built, go over his skill tree, and then we'll talk about some of the other things. So first off, going over his skill tree, as you can clearly see, he has 20 hard points in Firestorm, 20 hard points in Molten Boulder, 20 hard points in Fissure, 20 hard points in Volcano, and 15 hard points in Armageddon. And that's just simply because I ran out of points. Because 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 points is a lot of points. And you don't really have the amount of points that you would like to be able to access everything that you would like to have access to. Like, for instance, I did eventually put 1 point in Ravens, 1 point in Spirit Wolf, 1 point in Summon Direwolf, and 1 point in Summon Grizzly, specifically because I wanted access to the Grizzly Bear. Now, there are other ways that you can get access to the Grizzly Bear, namely making sure that you have a helmet, for instance, that might have access to that specific thing, but it's really going to be up to how you want to have it set up. I also put 1 point in Oak Sage, of course, because I do utilize the Oak Sage to help keep me alive, and the Solar Creeper to help me regenerate mana, and of course the Bear to help tank, which is certainly not useful. Solar Creeper is really the one that I'm using because it gives me a nice mana recovery rate per corpse that's eaten, and it's also just a little cheap way that I can get rid of corpses on the ground, which helped for when I was farming Neolithak. Nothing in the shapeshifting tree whatsoever. As for stat points, I ended up putting in 100 base points into strength, no points into dexterity, 405 points into vitality, and basically nothing into energy either. As for equipment, I ended up swapping between Heart of the Oak and Spirit, although eventually I would have wanted to get access to a Phoenix, but this build didn't end up that way. And Phoenix is just really expensive as well. It's not something I can reliably add into a build and be like, hey, you should definitely get a Phoenix. Because, well, if your build requires a Phoenix, well then it's not going to be the greatest. I did eventually, however, find a Mangsong's Lesson, and it was much to my surprise to find out that the Mangsong's was actually just as good, if not better, than the Hoto Spirit combo. And there was also other considerations besides just simply fire damage. So one of the things that you have to remember about the Fire Druid is that the Fire Druid is not just fire damage. It's fire damage with Firestorm, and it's fire damage with Fissure, but it's also physical slash fire with Molten Boulder. It's also physical slash fire with Volcano, and it's physical slash fire with Armageddon. So you end up with a large number of skills that are physical as well as fire. And so going full in on the fire isn't quite as useful, I found, than trying to get both. So with the +5 to skills and the negative resistance, I was able to have my cake and eat it too, and I found that Mangsong's was actually a pretty good choice. I eventually would have wanted to socket it and put a fire facet in it, obviously. I ended up using Arcane's Valor with a fire facet in it, mainly because it has +2 to skills and I could get a fire facet. Flickering Flame with +2 Armageddon, +1 Tornado, and +2 Solar Creeper. And of course, that ended up with, I think it was a pretty low roll on the negative resistance, -11, which wasn't too amazing. I ended up using a crafted Druid Amulet, +2 skills, faster cast, 26 strength, 20 mana. I don't know if I had a better one than this one or an alternate, but that's what I ended up with. I also ended up with a 1920 Druid Torch, which was pretty amazing. A 1720 Annihilus with 10% increased experience, And of course, I'm using a Fire Sunder, which is basically required for this build, as well as Ellie Skiller, Ellie Skiller, Ellie Skiller, Ellie Skiller. And as far as the other ones, it's pretty much just a bunch of extra resistances to, you know, fill in the resistances that I needed on my character. And it looks like I got 5 points just sitting around. I don't know why. I guess I must have leveled up at some point. I'm using Mage Fist, of course, because that's +1 fire skills, which gives me +1 to all my fire skills. I have a pretty decent all-res ring here, which, you know, it could have been a Soj or a, you know, something like that. Would have been definitely very nice, but that's not what I ended up with. I also ended up with this crappy little ring. I don't know what the hell this is doing in here. Maybe I just using that to fill in. Oh, I'm using it for the strength for some reason. I probably have better equipment for this guy just hanging around somewhere. Since the end of ladder, it's pretty much a situation of, well, okay, let's just strip all the gear and give it to the next guy. So I may have mixed this one up a little bit, but he would have been probably best off with like 2 Sojas, maybe a Ravenfrost in there for the Cannot Be Frozen. And as far as the belt goes, it looks like he's just using a dual res belt right now, but a Spiderweb Sash certainly would have gone a long way as well. All in all, though, the character is an interesting one. I have to say that my playthrough on the Fire Druid is definitely one of those characters that I was impressed with how well they work in terms of like killing large groups of monsters. I mean, if you're constantly hitting all your buttons and you got your Armageddon running and you've got all your dojinks, you know, popping, you can kill pretty well with all of the massive amount of damage that you can put out. But what I did find is that he wasn't really all that great at killing single targets. I did try and do a couple things like Pandemonium Diablo, Uber Diablo, and things like that. Uber Diablo specifically. And I did have trouble with Uber Diablo. He doesn't really do very well versus Uber Diablo. Not a lot of good ways to dish out a massive amount of single target damage. I ended up with an Ethereal Vamp Gaze on my Mercenary, a Treachery, of course, which is a pretty good choice, and an Ethereal Armor. And I ended up using this Ammed Warpike specifically because it kept giving me Amp, and the Amp damage was actually amazing for this particular build. All of the physical damage that comes from the Volcano, the Armageddon, and the Molten Boulder gets amplified by the Amp damage on the weapon. And you could obviously throw in a Infinity in here if you wanted to. That would also be a good option. Or you could go with a Barbarian Merc and use a Plague Sword so you have the lower resistance. That could be a decent option too. This was just what I ended up with, my Mr. Emilio. And honestly, I did pretty well. I managed to get to level 92 that season. This season was ended short simply because of the fact that, well, Diablo 4 was coming out very shortly thereafter. They had the beta, you know, the early access stuff, and then Tears of the Kingdom launched, and I was playing that for quite some time. So I didn't really get to fully gear out this character the way that I would have probably wanted. But quite honestly, though, I had a lot of fun. It's not my personal preference of a character, though. I do feel like a couple things here. Number one, it's a real button masher. You pretty much have to use all of the abilities. Because of the delays that are inherent in the abilities, Firestorm has a delay of 0.6 seconds, Molten Boulder has a delay of 1 second, Fissure has a delay of 1.6 seconds, Volcano has a delay of 6 seconds, and Armageddon is just always on. You feel like you're at an arcade, like in a fighting game. Because to get optimal damage out of this build, you really have to be casting everything. You've got to hit your Armageddon, you've got to use your Volcano, use your Molten Boulder, use your Fissures, use your Molten Boulders, use your Fissures, use your Volcano, recast your Volcano, hit your Molten Boulder, use everything. And if you have everything running all at one time, if you're running everything, you've got all your Doojanks going, your Molten Boulders, you've got your Fissures on the ground, your Armageddon's running, you're just constantly pressing buttons. There are so many buttons to press on this particular build. And I think that's one of the things that I didn't really like so much. Man, I felt like when I was playing this character, there was never a time I wasn't pressing a button. Because If you do it properly, if you cast your fissure and then you wait 1.6 seconds to cast your next fissure, you can cast your firestorm, your molten boulder, your volcano in between those things. You cast your volcano, it's only once every 6 seconds, and so when you cast your volcano, then you're working on things like your fissure and your molten boulder. And in between everything, you're throwing off your little firestorms. One of the things I didn't like about the character was the kind of incompatibility between the actual abilities. And what do I mean by incompatibility between the abilities? Well, fissure is something that you can cast anywhere you want to, right? So you can just point, bam, it's there, right? So it's a ranged ability. You can cast it underneath yourself, right? You can do whatever you want with fissure, and fissure works very well with volcano. So if you're in a situation where you find a monster, you can very easily just cast fissure, volcano, and you have two abilities directly underneath of each other that are basically long-range, infinite-use skills that you can place anywhere you want to place them, right? But the problem with this is that, well, other abilities, like Firestorm, are not long-range. They're very short-range, as you can clearly see. They split, and to get to optimal damage out of Firestorm, you really have to kind of stand directly next to the monster when you cast it. If you stand directly next to the monster when you cast it, it does halfway decent. Armageddon also similarly only casts around you specifically, right? So again, you have to be next to the monster for the Armageddon to actually hit the monster. Because if you're not next to the monster, well then the Armageddon's not hitting anything. So you kind of have to put yourself in harm's way with Armageddon to actually get full damage out of it. In this way, Armageddon and Firestorm are very similar in their need to be very close to the monsters. Basically face tank, right? However, Volcano and Fissure, you don't have to face tank. You can cast those anywhere, pop them right underneath the monster's feet, and, you know, it's basically kind of like a set it and forget it scenario. You can oftentimes, as you're running around, just simply, like, find a monster, and then cast Volcano, Fissure right underneath their feet, and just walk away. And this kind of stuff makes for very interesting gameplay as far as those two abilities go, because Volcano and Fissure work very well together. Molten Boulder, on the other hand, is a weird ability that kind of doesn't have a place. It kind of works better when you're close up, but it also is a ranged ability too. And it doesn't go as far as, say, Fissure does, because I can cast Fissure and Volcano at the very edge of the screen. So it's kind of like this weird pseudo ability that's in between the two. Not really fulfilling either one of the roles, so it kind of fits into either category if you want to use it for those categories. Basically, though, the problem with this is that you have to use all of them. So you have some abilities that are complementary to each other, like Volcano and Fissure complement each other quite well, and then you have some other abilities that complement each other, like Firestorm and Armageddon complement each other, but for the most part, you don't really have anything that works completely all the way well together. And since abilities that require you to be in melee range are kind of, you know, the end-all be-all of everything. In other words, if I want damage from my Armageddon, if I want damage from my Firestorm, then I have to be in melee range. And if I want to get maximum damage out of this character, then I have to be in melee range, because I'm not going to get maximum damage out of my character just using Molten Boulder, Volcano, and Fissure. To get maximum damage, I have to be using Armageddon, Firestorm, Molten Boulder, Fissure, yeah, etc. This is an issue with the character that I've played around with, and I just really didn't like how it felt like I was a half ranged character, caster, and a half melee character that needed to be like within melee range all the time. Now, on top of this, there is another issue, and it's just how loud the character is. I constantly felt like I was yelling at my companions because let me actually just push all the buttons here real quick so you understand. It's just a very loud character. Like, all of the explosions, the fire, the volcanoes, the Armageddons going off all the time. And if I had my my sound up, which I don't. You get the picture now, right? It's a very loud class. Very loud. Just. Blah, 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 blah. So, what do I think about the Fire Druid as a whole? Well, I mean, it works. You can kill stuff now. With the addition of the Fire Sunders and the way that they changed the fire skills, the Fire Druid is actually a real build that actually works now. It never was before, not really. You never really could do the Fire Druid, not before Sunder Charms, because there wasn't really a reliable way to break the fire immunes, and the fire immunes were everywhere. And that's one of the really big issues with this character, is there are so many fire immunes all over the place. However, since half the skills are physical damage, you can kind of bypass some of the fire immunes by utilizing some of these physical damage abilities. And this is one of the reasons why I ended up going with an amp weapon as opposed to something that would reduce the fire resistance of the monsters, because I didn't really feel like focusing on the fire resistance was the best idea. It was much easier for me to focus on the physical damage side of the skills and take advantage of the physical damage of the side of the skills to my characters, you know, I don't really know how to put it. I guess there's just ease of playing the game. I found out that it was much better to focus on the physical side of the damage of the skills, because most monsters that were like pretty much immune to fire, or mostly immune to fire, or all the way immune to fire, were so ridiculously resistant to the fire damage point of things that the physical damage with the amp would just absolutely shred them, because most of the time they were not immune to physical and fire at the same time, which helped me out a ton. And of course the amp also breaks that physical immunity too if I was in a situation where that occurred, and it's just really helpful. Not to mention the fact that it also gives my Merc here quite a bit of additional damage to have the amp proc along with the other. Although you may not always have access to amp, you could also use Decrepify in the form of Reaper's Toll or something of that nature. I don't think I want to play a Fire Druid again. The main issues, the main issue that I have with this character is just the fact that he's not capable of reliably and quickly killing monsters like Uber Diablo, or Uber Bale, or Uber Mephisto, or Pandemonium Diablo. And the reason is because he just doesn't put out the kind of single target damage that you would want to be able to achieve those goals. He can do things like summon his bear over and over again and keep Lilith busy infinitely, which I actually did during Season 4. There was a situation where our entire group died for I don't even know what reason. I think it was like a cursed or a mighted pack or something that gave Lilith might, and we all were getting our butts kicked. And I just sat there and I just cast my bear over and over again. One of the interesting things that you can do with a minion like this is you can just cast your bear next to Lilith, and she was so enthralled with killing the bear that I could just simply go like this over and over again and just keep distracting her until my group was able to, you know, manage things, you know, get everybody back rezzed up and potioned up and everything, and rebuffed and stuff like that. And then once we were able to get rebuffed, I stopped casting the bear and we went back to it, right? But for the most part, you're going to have trouble when it comes to Ubers. You're going to have trouble when it comes to Pandemonium Diablo. It's not going to be as easy on this character as it is on a lot of the others. Yes, you can focus entirely into the fire resistance. This is another way that you can do it. So if you focus entirely into the fire side of things, you'll do a really nice, decent amount of fire damage, but you'll forgo all the physical damage that you get from Volcano, Armageddon, and Molten Boulder. Into a more specific fire build, which is focusing on the fire damage. Now, there are two skills in the tree, Firestorm and Fissure, that are specifically fire damage and only do fire damage. But on the whole, you are giving up a huge part of your damage by sacrificing all of the physical to enhance the fire. And let's talk about the individual skills real quick, just to make sure that I get give you a good idea of how this character works. So first off, Firestorm is an ability that is very close range. We talked about this earlier, but it does require you to be very close to the monster. The little tendrils, one of them goes straight, and the other ones just go random wherever they want to go. And the damage of Firestorm is not anywhere near close to what it actually says on the tooltip. If you want more information on that, I do recommend you check out my Firestorm video. The second ability, which is Molten Boulder, is interesting because it does travel a longer distance, and it has many, many different types of damage in it. It has a fire path, it has a hit damage when it actually comes in contact with a monster, and has an explosion, which is the same as the meteor explosion and the meteor fire, which goes on the ground. And it can also hit the target more than once if it knocks them back and then hits them again as it's knocking them back away from you. The other skill is Fissure. Now, Fissure is probably one of my favorites. It is a floor-based attack, very similar to the way that Blizzard works on the Sorceress, and it actually puts little gouts of fire all over the ground. Unless the gout of fire actually hits the target, it doesn't do any damage. It can dish out pretty decent damage, though, and quite honestly, you can pretty much solo normal difficulty with Fissure. Fissure is just kind of insane early on. Most fire damage actually is pretty good early on, and then once you get Nightmare difficulty and all the fire immunes start to show up, that's when you realize fire wasn't maybe the best idea. The next ability is Volcano. Now, Volcano is actually pretty amazing because you can put it directly underneath of a monster and hit them with all the little explosions, and that's really kind of like the best way to use Volcano is to find a monster, and what you do is you just take that Volcano and you put it right up their anus. You Volcanus their anus like this. You just put it right under their butthole. And that way you can get maximum damage out of it. It's a very nice skill that you can use placement-wise, but it does have a really long delay, so you aren't going to be able to use it as much as you would like. As you can see, I can cast one, and then I can cast a second one shortly before the first one disappears, and then I can cast another one shortly before that one disappears. They don't really last a particularly long time. The casting delay is 4 seconds, and the duration is 6. I may have said 6 earlier as the casting delay, but it's 6 duration, 4 casting delay. Then finally is Armageddon. Armageddon is an ability that you can just cast once and you just move on. It does have a pretty long duration of 50 seconds, and if you do happen to cast it again, it will actually just refresh the duration, which is not bad at all. It recently got buffed a while back, so it actually hits more often, and it does more damage than it used to. The radius is larger. There was a whole bunch of changes involving an Armageddon. And basically, you use it, you stand in the center of it, you let the monsters come in here, and they get hit by all the horrible fire effects, and they end up getting, murderized. It's a whole thing with this character is knowing what each ability does and when each ability is best to be used. Obviously, Armageddon is nice, but it's not always useful, especially when you can't reach the monster. So if I were in a situation where a monster was over there and I couldn't get over there for whatever reason, but I could still attack, things like Molten Boulder might be useful, but Armageddon's not because I can't get over there. Volcano, on the other hand, I could just pop a Volcano right under their anus and not have to worry about it, right? So each individual skill has its own speciality. Armageddon and Firestorm, like I said, are very good for attacking close range, and then your Fissure and your Volcano are very good for popping up directly underneath of a target, no matter where they are, and Molten Boulders in between. All in all, yeah, like I said, I probably wouldn't make this character again, but it was fun at least to one time build a Fire Druid and get a good idea of how the Fire Druid works overall. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about Taco Hell. That's the character's name, by the way, Taco Hell. And as always, keep watching.